Welcome back, my little nerds. So, if you guys are tuning in, it means you probably tuned in last week for our whole new series here on IGTV, and we thank you. We really, really appreciate that you guys are tuning in here. So, my hair is a mess. Okay, there we go. So, today we are going to be continuing with our pre-Socratic philosophers series here on our IGTV, and today we're going to be discussing my main man, my favorite one of this whole lot, and his name is Xenophanes. So Xenophanes is spelled like this. This is how you spell Xenophanes, and he's actually from this place called Colophon. So Colophon, I think that's how you're saying it, spelled like this, and it's here on a map. So have fun with all that information in one go. Now he was probably born in around 570-ish BC. I always say ish. As you know, if you watch this channel a lot, there's always an ish, there's always a maybe, it's always that's subject to change. But at the moment, we kind of assume it was about 570 BC, and his main argument, which is why I think he's so interesting, is his main argument is where he's really discussing God and the gods itself. So he really discusses religion, and he kind of tries to get down to the bone of religion and question all of religion, which during this time in Greece, unheard of. And that's why I'm obsessed with it. The style that Xenophanes wrote, though, Xenophanes wrote in the style that is poetry. We have a lot of fragments from his work, which is called On Nature, but it was all done in prose. Well, prose, that was not the right word to say. It was all done in what is that, meter, there it is. So it reads more like Homeric myths. It reads very to a beat. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate by clicking my fingers. Anyways, so it all reads to a beat. He writes in poetry. It makes for an interesting read, but we only have fragments, so, you know, you can't really get with the beat of this whole thing in the way that necessarily we want to, or I want to, because I'm a big fan of him. But the reason why him writing to a meter is so important is because his meter is not the same, but it definitely reflects back on Homer's meter. So Homer famously, the guy that wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, right, he wrote in a meter, and Xenophanes writes in a meter that's slightly different, so, you know, you read it slightly differently. It's not, 6 feet in a line, blah, 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 none of that kind of stuff, but it is still a meter, so you read it in the same way, and that's important because Xenophanes first attacks Homer before getting into his argument. So Xenophanes attacks Homer because he suggests that belief in the Homeric gods is absurd, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But he says it's ridiculous because he says that those gods are so human and not moral. He says, how could you possibly believe that those gods are gods? How could you possibly believe that they live above us if they're right down here, supposedly? They're walking around and they're being twats as far as he's concerned. So he argues against those gods, which no one did. And he's like, that's stupid. Also, why would you ever believe that those gods were anthropomorphic? How could you ever believe that a god could come down to Earth and interact with us? Why do you think it would care? Essentially, once again, I'm paraphrasing. Now, in my opinion, he makes this argument even more strong, even stronger even. He makes this argument so strong by saying, look, if you believe that the Homeric gods are the gods, if they're not that moral, if they're doing all this weird shit, if you believe that they're real, then that's ridiculous, because if horses and if lions, these are literally the examples that he used, if horses had hands and they could, draw their own gods, the horse would draw a god that was familiar to them. It would draw a god that had all the same flaws as them. It would draw a god that looked like them, and they would do the same thing, because that's obviously what you're accustomed to do. So in the same way, that's what humans have done with, Greeks at the time. That's what they had done with the Homeric gods, is that they created gods that had the same flaws. They created gods that could do the same things as them, and then could just explain the origins of things. But essentially, they were just humans with more powers, the same way that a horse would probably do that with its own, whatever a horse god needs. Like, I don't know, can eat unlimited amount of carrots or polos, whatever. Now, it's this argument that causes him to make his first official premise. And his premise to his whole argument, little Xenophanes, he's really putting out the bag, is he says there's no way that a god like that could exist for the reasons that I've just set out, and therefore a god must be the polar opposite of what we think a god should be, and a god must be unmoving, a god must be all-knowing, a god must always be there, and it cannot have a human form, essentially. Therefore, he can't even have similar thoughts, he can't have a similar body. This has to be a being that is so different to what we could possibly understand and comprehend, that's what makes it a god, and that's what makes it all-knowing and all-powerful and all this, that, and the other. In fact, interestingly, Xenophanes puts forward an idea which is left in its fragments, and actually it is in Greek. It's this. I'm going to try and type it up. Wish me luck. So I haven't done this yet, obviously, but in Greek this is the quote. If not, I'm just sticking in the screenshot of it because it means I couldn't type it. But the quote means all him sees, all him thinks, all him hears. So that should really sound like Eastern philosophy, you know, this whole idea, it comes up a lot. And Xenophanes is one of the first Greeks to say that. So that's a nice, cool fact before we finish off his little argument. The idea that God must be such a big force that we can't even understand him, we can't even comprehend him, is what then leads him on to make another argument. So I'm trying to bring you along this journey with me. So we go from, we're going to start, you know, we'll just put up the points thus far, because I know it can be a little bit complicated. So first point is that he writes in a meter, which represents Homer. He then disses Homer's gods, and he says that's ridiculous. He then uses the horse example to say this is why it's ridiculous, because horses would do the same thing if they could. And then he leads on from that to say then a god must be so strong, a god must be so powerful that we cannot understand it, we cannot comprehend it. So that's his third piece of advice. And he then solidifies that by saying all him sees, all him thinks, all him hears. And he uses that because he's like, that's how different he has to be. Okay, he's got to be that different. And so because of that, it then leads him on to analyzing the sun, the clouds, rainbows, like all this to being like, look, if all of this stuff exists, then we all must come from the sun, which then comes from a god, and this, that, and the other. But in talking about the sun, he kind of uses that really to say that human knowledge is so limited, because we really don't understand how any of that works. And because it's so limited, it thus must mean that there must be a god, which he says is one god, but you can, you know, one god above many is pretty much his direct quote, which is interesting, but I got in trouble for saying a lot of that at university, so either way. But he uses the argument of the sun and the rainbow, saying that we couldn't possibly comprehend a lot of that stuff because the God who's in charge of everything, essentially, this God, this power that's in charge of everything, that's all-knowing, that's all-seeing, that doesn't have a body that we can understand, that doesn't have thoughts, like none of that, that is moving, unmoving even, that is able to move things but remains unmoved, right? So this God that exists, it's actually hiding things from us. So that's why we can't explain a lot of the rainbows. That's why we can't explain a lot of the sun. We can't explain a lot of the clouds and all that kind of stuff. We know basic ideas, but the God hasn't revealed all of its secrets to us. But he just kind of rounded off the argument by saying that, like, you know, by like studying and learning and actually understanding the truth, which he's like is not the Homeric gods, but by understanding the truth, then we can kind of learn to unravel what we have learned, unlearn what we've learned even, and then move on to understanding the truth. But that's Xenophanes' argument, is that Xenophanes' argument, this is going to be a bit longer than the previous one, sorry, but Xenophanes' argument is based in religion, it's based in God, and it's basically, he's the first dude, if you have to remember one thing, he's the first dude that goes against the Homeric gods and suggests more so a power rather than a god. He suggests more so a henotheistic god, kind of, you don't necessarily have to take it literally, because even though he says a lot of things like one god, whatever, I'm going to get into analysis if I keep going, but either way. He talks a lot about God, and he suggests that our understanding of the gods and the idea that they're anthropomorphic is f***ing stupid, and we should stop believing that, and instead we should study and read, and we'll figure it out, and the almighty power, the almighty God, whatever it happens to be, will reveal its secrets to us if we attempt to learn the truth. So obviously I have not analyzed Xenophanes. That was just like a 10-minute video, or however long it is, of me explaining Xenophanes. Xenophanes is a little bit complicated, but I think that he's really one of the most interesting pre-Socratic philosophers because he's discussing religion, and I loved it. The fact he goes against absolutely everybody, and he's not the only person to do this. We'll be getting into another one. Yeah, we'll do one tomorrow, and then we'll do one on Sunday, definitely. So we'll be discussing more so these ideas of gods, which I think that everybody who studies ancient history or who kind of goes into ancient history thinks that everybody believed the same thing, and that's not true. And that's what these pre-Socratics are showing us, is that they were the ones who were behind the scenes going, I disagree. And Xenophanes disagreed with the Homeric idea of gods. So, thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys like Xenophanes. And if you guys want to know more analysis of Xenophanes' argument, or where you can find Xenophanes' argument, then definitely leave a comment below this video, just so that I know. And on your way down, you can definitely hit the like button so that I'm aware that you guys are enjoying these. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will be seeing you tomorrow with Parmenides. So I'll see you then.